Greetings to Borowski. As you've doubtless heard, President Obama is in his usual ambivalent U.S. Democrat funk, specifically about releasing classified secrets of U.S. torture operations. On the one hand, the one he wants to keep open, he will extend toward the law, toward public opinion, liberal values, to play liberal good guy like a string instrument. But the other extremity is the closed, mailed fist of executive power, thrust up the anus of not only Al-Qaeda, but anyone who questions imperial state prerogative. Which course shall he follow? The of course. Of course, political expediency. Exposing yesterday's crimes of his predecessor is a way of removing, or at least fuzzing the focus, off his own ongoing assassinations, renditions, drone strikes, and other extralegal actions of the Joint Special Operations Command, the true perpetrators of covert violence in the Obama administration, not the good old CIA. Well, not to worry that he'll waffle his way through and find some way to compromise the issue. There will never be a time when it is in the state interest, or those circles who run the state, to divulge the true history of their crimes. As an example, I'll wager hard currency that you were unaware of the impending centenary of a war on terror within the United States. When special forces carried out targeted assassinations on U.S. soil against homegrown jihadis who beheaded Americans and burned them out of house and home, while a whole section of a major state was locked down like occupied Palestine with its own Nakba to boot. 100 years ago, Mexico was in the middle of its revolution, and part of the spillover was brought to the U.S. by Mexican radicals who came up with the Plan de San Diego, named after the town of San Diego in southern Texas. The authorship of said plan was murky, but its gist was that those U.S. lands taken from Mexico in the 1840s should be subject to a reconquista, with all Anglo males put to death, while all those suffering from white racism, including blacks, Indians, as well as ethnic Hispanics, should join in creating a free republic of South Texas. This new state would be located between the Nueces and Rio Grande, or Rio Bravo to Tejanos, and eventually rejoined to Mexico, just as Texas had been previously detached by revolutionaries and joined to the U.S., but in reverse. Sound crazy? Well, remember that the Mexican Revolution was a time of chaos and euphoria when all the shibboleths of the old order, as in all revolutions, were getting knocked over, and a new order was still up for grabs. And the U.S.-Mexican border was not the Iron Curtain we know today, but a very porous frontier, not only geographically, but culturally and politically, too. Ethnic Mexicans, Tejanos, those born in South Texas after it became United States soil, identified with the plight of their cousins across the river. Like them, they were also suffering dispossession in the form of Anglo immigrants. At the turn of the 20th century, the lower Rio Grande Valley became a sort of Palestine for fruit, vegetable, and cotton farmers from the Midwest. On the heels of the railroad came settlers and speculators, and thousands of Tejanos lost their humble little ranchos to become cotton-picking braceros on land their families had once owned. The Mexican Revolution spawned its own Yasser Arafats, like Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, who pointed the way out of this impasse by means of armed struggle. And thus was born the so-called seditionists, who openly called themselves traitors to the Gringo Republic and began a holy war on the Anglo farmers and ranchers of the Rio Grande border zone. And it was an ugly little dirty war indeed. For a year and a half, beginning in August 1915, the Rio Grande border from Brownsville west was a real killing field. Sedicioso guerrilla bands attacked Anglo farmers, especially those known to be promoting new segregation statutes, and stealing old Tejano land. The guerrillas had no reserve in attacking soft targets, killing men, women, and children in frontier Indian style, often after violent torture. In one case, an American soldier was captured after a firefight, taken into the mesquite, and in true jihadi style was decapitated with his head left on a pole stuck in the bed of the Rio Grande facing the U.S. side. Using the Mexican border as a sanctuary, they also attacked the moderates, the good Mexicans, who were playing ball with the local political regime. The result was a civil war among Tejanos as well as an ethnic war. Texas responded as you'd expect from the state of W. Bush. The Texas Rangers were given carte blanche to act as a death squad, capturing and executing ethnic Mexicans they thought suspicious. Anglo-vigilante civilians joined in to help. Suspects were taken from their homes in night raids at gunpoint and roped and ridden off into the dark. Soon the mesquite and gullies were filled with body dumps of thousands of unknown, mutilated corpses of ethnic Mexican males. Thousands more escaped with their goods and families into Mexico at a time when Mexico was in more chaos and uproar than it is now in drug gang violence. There are postcards surviving from this period, once freely circulated in the United States mail, showing Texas Rangers astride their mounts, posing beside the lassoed corpses of dead banditos. These were victims of the Rangers' targeted assassination policy. Whether they were high value or not can't be known now, but these special ops soon brought law, order, segregation, and the free market for Anglo property holders, taming the border from its ISIS-like insurgents. The result was the ethnic cleansing of about half the Hispanic population of South Texas, until more liberal immigration policies after World War II produced a surge of newcomers. Other American settlers had more specific recommendations, like Richard Kleberg, manager of the King Ranch, the largest single landholding in the region and probably in the United States. His idea was to put the region under martial law, require everyone to give an alibi for his public movements, except capitalist proprietors like himself, of course, and those who couldn't prove their innocence were to be quarantined in concentration camps along the Rio Grande down to the Gulf, where they'd be set to work clearing a security strip a mile wide north from the river. Running parallel would be a military patrol road that would deal with Hispanic Hamas infiltrators. Much of this has been finally realized today, you might notice if you happen to be traveling along the border. What stopped the South Texas insurrection was a number of factors. The brutality of the repression, but also U.S. recognition of the Carranza government in Mexico, gave Mexican authorities a stake in policing their side of the border. Also, the demand of the U.S. Army and the Department of Justice that state and local vigilante actions be terminated, or at least federally regulated, in restoring law and order all around. The state special forces teams, the Texas Rangers, were not to usurp federal authority to deal with an international border issue. A different standard was to be applied within the United States, and the U.S. government was showing in marine-occupied zones like Haiti and Santo Domingo at then, or would later show in Iraq and Afghanistan. General Frederick Funston of the U.S. Army would complain to the Texas governor about Rangers and civilians firing across the Mexican border, trying to provoke incidents. He also tried to rein in vigilante killings by a promise from the governor to instruct the Rangers to do otherwise, about as effective as congressional mandates in stopping Abu Ghraib. This from the commanding officer of the U.S. conquest of the Philippines, who had urged the utmost brutality in crushing the insurrection of Emilio Aguinaldo, and it is stated for the record in 1902. I personally strung up 35 Filipinos without trial, so what's all the fuss over dispatching a few treacherous savages? If there had been more of this, the war would have been over long ago. Impromptu domestic hanging might also hasten the end of the war. For starters, all Americans who had recently petitioned Congress to sue for peace in the Philippines should be dragged out of their homes and lynched. Sounds somewhat familiar to Baneros in the era of Homeland Security? Thus, the issue for the United States government in South Texas was more jurisdictional than human rights centered. To this day, the insurrection of San Diego was known mostly to those living in the Rio Grande Valley. The actions of the Texas Rangers were never questioned. To those who criticized the Rangers were openly threatened. The bad memories were officially suppressed in the Texas media, and the larger American media has never seen fit to explore the issue. A veil has been drawn over the whole thing, letting it be forgotten, exactly as the CIA, the armed forces, much of Congress, and certainly the executive of the United States would like to see happen to the current record of assassinations and tortures a century later. 100 years from now, when the perpetrators are all as dead as their victims, when the blood of the files is safely dried from contaminating pathogens, maybe then some academics will be allowed to peek inside. Uh-oh, maybe it's the Texas Rangers telling me old times down home are not forgotten. All right. Hello? Henry Kissinger? I thought you were dead. Most of my callers seem to be. What's that? You think no real good is served by dredging up what American forces had to do under necessity? That it will only increase the potential for retaliation against Americans, as former CIA Director Mike Hayden says? Well, but who says they were necessary? And what about justice and accountability? What's that got to do with running the U.S. government? That's only for criminals, not officials charged with managing our free country. But if they walk like a duck and look like ducks and quack the same, what's the Hello? Henry? I guess that was an unauthorized connection to baristas, and it never happened.